In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the current conditions and finally the first signs of a big pattern flip. I've kind of known this was coming soon, where we'd be able to see this potentially in the long range, and we're getting our first little hints at a potential big flip at some point during the late first week of November and maybe the early second week of November. Sometime in that time frame seems to be when this big flip has the potential to occur. Sometimes we get false signals that this is going to happen and it doesn't, and then other times it's a legitimate signal. And I'm just going to tell you this before we get started. The biggest thing that we're going to want to watch for is consistency. If we're still seeing this tomorrow and the next day, that's going to be a really good sign that this is something very legitimate. But if we wake up tomorrow and it's all of a sudden gone, well, that's how we would know it's a false signal coming in from the model. Let's just dive into the current conditions, and there isn't quite as much to speak of as there was in the past few days. We do have some storminess moving in through the northwestern United States as expected. We do have our low here located near Arkansas and Missouri, and this is creating some showery activity for a lot of different states across the southeast in kind of the middle portions of the United States there. And this is just going to continue over the coming days. We'll see this on the model run guidance a little bit later on, but it's going to continue to spread further apart and include many different states. So it's already kind of began to do that, but we're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. Now, as we're taking a look here near Vancouver, Seattle here, Portland, the important thing to note is our low here is north of even Vancouver. So what we're seeing is actually, we're not seeing where the low is kind of located over the United States. We're actually just seeing the underneath stuff here from this low. But as this cold front rolls through, we could see more wintry weather with this. Notice here that we are seeing some heavier precipitation here, especially here near the Olympic Mountains here in the Olympic Peninsula, which I asked you guys what this area is called. And thankfully, you guys were able to help me out there. We can see that some of this is beginning to spread here closer to Seattle as time moves on. Mostly lighter activity, but you can tell that later on we are going to see more and more of this heavier activity probably moving further inland. But for now, the very coastal regions of Washington are seeing quite a bit of precipitation, but it can be expected that through the day and through the day tomorrow, we will see this spread to more and more areas across the Pacific Northwest. And now, as we take a look, we do have some spotty showers here across the plains, but that's not the main focal point we want to focus in on here. But around this low, we do have some heavier precipitation in some spots. It's still not very consistent. We do have some blank areas, and then we have these areas with kind of moderate to heavier showers across Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, as well, spreading into portions of Iowa now as we speak. Later on, Ohio, West Virginia could be involved as well. And again, there is blank areas, and then there is areas that are seeing this precipitation, and it's pretty spotty. So it's going to be hit or miss depending on where you're at. Now, the further underneath we go, the lighter things get. We can see much less widespread down here. So we see for Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina here as well, and even the panhandle of Florida, we're seeing plenty of heavier precipitation, but it is very isolated for many spots, so keep that in mind as well. And as I'm looking across the nation, it doesn't appear there's much else to talk about. We can tell that there is a little bit of a trough across the northern United States, jet stream doing something like this, but we do have a pretty big ridge beginning to develop across the eastern United States. So keep that in mind. There is a little bit of a ridge here in the west, but it's dying down. And once this low comes through, we should see much more of a trough in the west, ridge in the east pattern, which seems to be more of what we've been seeing. The big flip will possibly mean ridge in the west, trough in the east, which we haven't seen for about a week or so now. And we know that there's going to be at least another week of this trough in the west, ridge in the east pattern. So it'll be a 2 to 3 week pattern, but we do again have the beginning signs of that potentially flipping. So let's move on, talk about that model guidance, and show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I am so excited to talk about this, guys, because I really love this kind of a pattern this time of year. Ever since I was a kid, I always got excited for the big cool downs, especially in the fall time. You know, in the springtime, it's not so exciting. You're usually looking forward to the opposite, or at least that's how I work. In the spring, after a cold winter, I'm usually very excited for things to finally warm up, some thunderstorms. I'm excited for that type of stuff. This time of year, I'm sick of the hot summer we just had. Even though we've had some really nice cool downs and probably my favorite fall I've ever experienced in my life so far, weather-wise, I still am looking forward to the cold at this part of the year, and it is exciting to talk about. The West has gotten their fair share, just as the East did a few weeks ago, for multiple weeks actually. And now it looks like the tides are about to turn again. But let's talk about everything in between. First off, I've mentioned this multiple times throughout the past few days, but we're going to see this storm weaken but spread out. So we will see more and more states get involved. You notice it's only about, impacting about that size of an area. But just in a few days, we will see it impact a much, much larger area, a much more well-rounded pocket there. Probably about, I would say, at least twice the size of this area here. It is now impacting, but a little bit less impactful by this point. But this will be mostly happening between Monday and Tuesday there, tomorrow and the day after, Halloween evening, if you will. We can see this storm here that we were just taking a look at is now expanding throughout a lot of the Pacific Northwest. We also have some storminess down here for the South Central. As we continue this on towards Tuesday afternoon, we can see this storm becomes much more of a mid-Atlantic and northeast storm primarily. Even some coastal components to it potentially. We can see that this storm has dived south, and just like I mentioned, it is pulling that trough down as well, so the cold air is pulling down with it. In that case, we're seeing more and more ridging further east, and so we're seeing things move northward, and this is just reinforcing kind of a pattern that looks a lot more like this as far as the jet stream is concerned. More of a coastal storm here between Texas and Louisiana there as well. As we approach Wednesday, the 2nd, we can see an even more dramatic ridge here in the east with dry weather for the most part now by Wednesday, the 2nd. And definitely a trough here with wintry weather for the most part here. Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada here definitely seeing quite a bit of this impactful and very, very stormy weather. By Thursday here, we can see that there is some snowfall occurring all the way from California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, up through the Dakotas, but we see another one moving in potentially through the Northwest again. So more and more wintry weather with this big, big trough we have out west, reaching pretty far south with this cold air too, all the way to the Mexican border with this very cold air. Definitely a sight to see here Thursday the 3rd. Friday the 4th here, we see a strong low up here, a very long extending cold front. We do see plenty of wintry weather here across the northern Rockies there. We do see a kind of low area in here bringing some snowfall to the southern Rockies. Definitely some interesting weather taking place there on Friday. By time we're reaching Saturday, even more interesting weather, stronger low developing here, bringing some storminess, potentially severe weather here as well for Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. We cannot forget that although traditionally most of the severe weather occurs in the spring, the fall time is an interesting transition where we do see cold air meeting with hot air oftentimes that can also lead towards some very major severe weather events. There's not a single month where severe weather does not happen historically, so it is always possible. We need to keep that in mind. And this setup in particular, to me, just based off of what I'm seeing with the warm air intruding this way, and then a bit of a frontal boundary developing here with cold air meeting in this way, and the low underneath right here, definitely creates an interesting scenario that could encourage some severe weather. So we can't rule that out either. Now, this is when things begin to look interesting to me. We see this low develop here, and a bit of a cold front underneath, warm front perhaps up here. So there is still warm air racing to the north here on the eastern end of things. But we can tell that the main part of the trough here is happening over the central United States, and this cold air is trying to advance southward here. So we do have a storm system moving in through the northwest currently as well. Again, Sunday, November 6th. Monday the 7th here, we see plenty of charged cold air bottled up here. Warm air trying to race up the east coast, but watch how these next couple of hours progress here. This is when things get interesting. We start to see some ridging developing up here. And you might notice there's a snowstorm happening here a little bit in a different area than we've typically seen, okay? Because we've seen these lows diving down like this for the last few days. And when they dive down like this, they pull down the cold air in this area, and that's what brings the trough right there in the ridge here. What we're seeing is a warm bubble, a ridge here developing, potentially positive PNA, and we'll take a look at the temperature anomalies in just a little bit, or we will be able to see better. But what we're seeing is this low is moving through, and it looks like it's going to race above that bubble, which, if you can guess, since it would pull down the trough here, it might pull the trough down here, and it already looks like that's kind of happening, where we see the jet stream is like this, a little bit flat, but we can tell that there's definitely more in the east than there is in the west. And if anything, things are trending kind of north here. This can easily flip the pattern, and this is just the very, very, very beginning of it. And I think between the 9th and the 12th is when we'd see the main transition happen, if this is what is destined to happen. But this is definitely a very, very good sign that that will occur. Now, your total precipitation through the next 10 days, we're just going to break this down. We will get into that temperature anomalies in just a minute here. If you're anywhere in the whites here, we're expecting practically no precipitation. Your grays will be 1/10 of an inch or less of precipitation. Your greens will be a 1/10 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. Your blues will be 1/2 an inch to an inch. Your yellows being 1 inch to 2 inches. Your reds being 2 to 5 inches. And then your browns being 5 to 10 inches of precipitation. We see plenty of that for the northwest and then across the central United States as well. Snowfall here, interesting as well. Grays being 1/10 of, or about a dusting, if anything. I thought I was talking about the rainfall there for a second. Blues being 2 to 6 inches of snowfall. Purples being 6 to 10. Pinks being 10 to 20. Pastel blues being 20 to 30. And then your pastel purples in there for the northwest and northern Rockies. That is where we're going to be about 30 to 48 inches plus. Definitely a whole lot of snowfall expected out west for the Rockies, Cascades, and Sierra Nevadas. Now let's take a look at that exciting temperature pattern. I'm sure you all are curious about this, so we will break this down day by day. But first off, we can see the current pattern we're in is pretty flat and pretty neutralized. But what we start to see develop over time is more of a cold pattern in the west here. This is by Thursday of this upcoming week. Negative PNA, forcing the warm air around that warm air mass there, creating trough in the west, ridge in the east here. Now, as time rolls on, we see more of the same, except this trough has taken up way more area now, a little bit more dramatic. But by the time we're reaching later in the pattern, look at that. So we start to see warm air building here for the west. So again, that little sign of a positive PNA out there. And then a little bit of a mini trough happening here with this cold air looking primed to move into this region. Definitely could be a major Arctic blast, but not only that, the starting fire of a new pattern as we approach the middle portion of November. This is the long range. Take it with a grain of salt, but again, if you've been keeping up with us every single day, this is how we first identified the pattern change when it switched from cold in the east, warm in the west, to cold in the west, warm in the east. We found this pattern about 10 days out, just like this. We saw the beginning signs, and it ended up panning out, and it was this exact same model in the same exact time frame. So there is a decent chance that this is correct. So keep up to date with us. We do upload every single day. Be sure to subscribe to get those updates in your subscription box. Like the video if you did enjoy it, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts. I will see you guys in the next exciting video.